What is good? We are back with another reaction, and this one showed up on my watch feed or whatever it's called, and it's called Anime's Obsession with Europe, A Brief History, and the channel is called The Soak. Go and check him or her out. I have no idea where this is going to go. Hopefully there's no massive anime spoilers for animes we haven't watched, but I'm very, very curious about this this video, so we are going to get straight into it. So let's do it.
A show called Heidi, Girl of the Alps aired in 1974. A show called Heidi, Girl of the Alps aired on televisions worldwide, creating an instant global sensation. Still seen as a masterpiece today, the show told the story of a young girl.
We might have to watch this. This looks adorable. Is this a movie?
Instant global sensation. Still seen as a masterpiece today, the show told the story of a young girl named Heidi, who is sent to live with her grandfather in the Swiss Alps.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Here, she gets up to all kinds of adventures with Peter the goat herd, her dog Joseph, and her rich friend Clara, all while squirming her way into the heart of her grumpy old grandfather, and in turn, us, the viewing audience. If you're old enough but not familiar with the show, you probably live in either the UK or the US, two of the few places that the show didn't catch on. But across Europe, the Middle East, South America, South Africa, and Asia, this show was a huge hit. As someone who grew up in India before moving to the UK, I have incredibly fond memories of watching this show.
It looks
in the
beautiful.
90s, and my family still nostalgizes about the days that I watched innocent shows about little farmer girls and not violent anime featuring gratuitously big-boobied ladies. But what neither they nor
I don't watch those
nor
animes.
most of the viewing world realized at the time was that this was an anime, one of the first truly global anime. And one of the leading figures involved in its creation was a then unknown Hayao Miyazaki, who would go on to create an animation house by the name of Studio Ghibli.
I was going to say,
the
if
creators
that was him.
were in fact so keen on telling this story authentically that Miyazaki himself went on a scouting mission to Switzerland and throughout Europe to make sure they depicted the environment and characters as accurately as possible.
And that's why, oh god, I'm out of frame. That's why it looked so stunning. Everyone who's been to Switzerland has told me, bro, it is one of the most beautiful places on earth. You need to go. I really just want to go to Switzerland one day.
ところがいわゆる場面設計をやった宮崎駿はですね、ただ見て回ってるんですよね。景色なり、着ている服なり、建物なり、食器なり。ただ見てる。
My dad says it looks like, funnily enough, wherever you look, it's been drawn by an artist. That's how my dad put it.
But why was this 1970s anime made in Japan so keen on retelling an old Swiss children's novel? I mean, the original story is from the 1800s. And why do so many anime from then till now, and especially now, with the likes of Attack on Titan, Vinland Saga, and Frieren, all seem to have such a fascination with Europe? I mean, it's not like in the West, we make loads and loads of shows set in Japan. Only the odd film or TV show here and there, and they're almost never based on retelling authentic Japanese literature or folklore. Usually, they're just white guy ends up in Japan stories. But in anime, Europe or fictional places that are substitutes for Europe are such a common setting that you probably didn't even think about how normalized that is until I just mentioned it. So what's going on?
Oh, this
Where
looks
did anime's
adorable.
fascination and maybe obsession with Europe come from? Well, I'm about to tell you, but it's a bit of a long story, so settle in.
That anime looks really, really charming.
Nowadays, when we think of weebs in the West obsessing with Japanese culture and fetishizing the allure of Japan, we often make the mistake of assuming that it's a one-way street. But Japan itself has long been fascinated with Europe too, in its own way. Before we talk about anime, we need to talk through some important historical context. For those who aren't aware, Japan went through a period of isolation from the rest of the world called Sakoku, which means closed country, and it lasted over 200 years. During this time, which spanned from the early 1600s till the 1850s, Japan didn't allow any Europeans or generally foreigners to enter the country except for some limited trade with China and Korea and one singular Dutch trading post in Nagasaki. While this was a time of great cultural growth for Japan, Sakoku ended in 1853 when the US arrived with warships and demanded that Japan open its borders and then forced them to sign the hilariously named Treaty of Peace and Amity. After this time though, in what is known as the Meiji period, Japan once again opened its borders and set about to furiously catch pace with the rest of the world, having realized just how far they had fallen behind the Western powers. With this came an influx of technology, literature, and science into Japan, particularly that from Europe. European fashion became trendy.
I told you this, guys, was going to be an
became a
interesting
point of
video.
fascination. It is in this context that a lot of Japan's prominent media developed, particularly its films and eventually comic books or mangas. An easy mistake to make would be to assume that the Second World War is the cause of anime's fascination with Europe. But no evidence from any of the literature I read, and I've been researching this topic for like 2 months now, backed up that
really
idea.
cool.
It is an obvious conclusion to draw that Japan being allied with Germany would somehow make it fascinated with German culture, but if you stop to think about it just a little bit, you'll understand why it's not true. Germany
that another
didn't
Studio
suddenly
Ghibli?
become fascinated with Japan after the World War. Why would it? The alliance was purely militaristic. There was no exchange of cultural ideas, and there was no time for it. There was a global conflict going on. Living in the UK, we didn't suddenly become a lot more interested in France's culture, thank God, just because we were allied in the war, nor Russia. Instead, Japanese film and media developed itself during and after the war, with animated cartoon films being used for war propaganda and also for entertainment. They were massively influenced by works from all over Europe, particularly France and Russia, but had its own style and Japanese grounding and influences too. The medium slowly evolved into the styles and aesthetics that resemble what we would now recognize as being anime. Eventually, they became a commercial product, with manga being purchased by thousands of people, and with television, those stories began being converted into TV shows, which is when the boom of anime really came through in the 1960s and beyond.
Right, he's brave
60s
using
when
Persona
anime started to
music.
find a lot of commercial success both in Japan and abroad in the US and Europe.
Judo
First with
Boy.
Astro Boy, which was
Astro
the first
Boy.
anime film to be released in the US, and later in the 1970s.
Wait, Astro Boy's a film? Look at it. This is from the 60s.
Boy, which was the first anime film to be released in the
And it still has better animation than Jujutsu Kaisen. Okay, there's no need for that. Damn, that's crazy.
US and Europe.
We might have
First
to
with
go back
Astro
and like...
Boy, which was the first anime film to be released in the US, and later in the 1970s with Space Battleship Yamato. Here's where we start to see the establishment of a certain trope that would follow in a lot of anime thereafter. The adventures of young male protagonists in conflict-oriented worlds, which we now see as a staple in
best trope.
shonen anime like Naruto, One Piece, or My Hero Academia. But it's actually Shojo anime where our interests lie. Stories about young women targeted at a young female audience.
Never
While
watched
young
one.
boys
I'm
enjoyed
not a woman.
space operas about intergalactic war, young women in Japan were much more interested in stories about people, everyday interactions of love, jealousy,
Marmalade
and friendship.
Boy.
And this is where Europe comes into the picture. Since the beginning of the Meiji
Bocce's a shonen. Put some respect on her name. Wait. No. Never mind.
period that I spoke about earlier, young women in Japan were already fascinated with European fashion and aesthetics, and early shoujo anime reflected this, the large
Bocce's a
number of them
musical.
taking place in European settings. But one fascinating and surprising reason why early shoujo anime set their stories in Europe was that it
What a
allowed
weird
them to
art
explore
style.
otherwise forbidden themes, such as homosexual love and female empowerment. As legendary critic Frederick Schott writes, foreign settings create an exotic quality, with storybook scenes and fashions, and allow heroes and heroines to act in ways that are not always socially possible in Japan. A notable example of this was
Interesting.
The Rose of Versailles, a manga
Very
which
interesting.
eventually got turned into an anime and is set in the French royal court, just before and during the French Revolution.
love the
Initially,
old
show
art
follows
style,
the
man.
biographical story of Marie Antoinette, the last queen of France, but soon pivots to the real main
Joan
and
of Arc,
fictional
right?
character of Oscar Francois de Jager. And this is the point I will acknowledge that I'm pronouncing words in like 4 different languages, so please forgive me if any of my pronunciations are way off. Oscar is a young woman who was raised as a boy and a soldier by her father who longed for a male heir. Oscar becomes captain of the Queen's Guard, and although she openly identifies as a woman, her masculine demeanor and androgynous aesthetic create for various gender-defying and homoerotic
Karapika?
subplots. Oscar's first romantic intertwining, for example, is with a female character named Rosalie, who falls for Oscar after she saves her life multiple times. But Oscar rejects Rosalie's advances, stating that she wanted to be in a relationship with a man, not a woman. In shoujo anime, it was very common to explore such romantic interests between women, so much so that it had its own term, Class S relationships. These were not usually sexual in their nature, but still romantic friendships between women with intensely strong emotional bonds or admiration for one another. After this failed situationship, Oscar then encounters two different male suitors. One who sees her only as a man, and one who sees her only as a woman. Both of which prove exceedingly frustrating to Oscar, who wants to be recognized for her whole self. Eventually, Oscar falls in love with her lifelong sidekick, Andre, who is himself an androgynous figure, and by the end of the story, cuts his hair to look similar to Oscar's, and indeed, by the end of the show, they look very much alike. Oscar even describes Andre as her shadow, and the fact that they're both basically the same person is again a nod to the homoerotic elements which were a normal part of the genre. It was this ability to play with the dynamics of sex and gender which made shoujo anime so popular with Japanese girls at the time, who were able to project themselves into situations they otherwise wouldn't.
What a unique art
Male
style.
homosexual love, for example, was fairly common in shoujo anime, because the idea of men having sex was considered a lot more normal than thinking about the sexuality of women. On top of that, the Rose of Versailles was also politically very bold and inspiring, with the main character Oscar becoming so disillusioned with the corruption of the French aristocracy that she joins the Republican rebels and fights to overthrow the monarchy, eventually dying in battle for the cause. These progressive and transgressive messages made the Rose of Versailles so popular at the time that, according to critic Deborah Shamoun, when the main character Oscar died, teachers reportedly were forced to suspend classes because all the girl students were in tears. And one angry fan actually mailed a letter containing a razor to the artist who wrote the manga.
Yeah, we're definitely not going to watch any... What are these called? Shoujos? Yeah, I'm not dealing with that fan base. No. I'm not dealing with a shoujo fan. Man, Bocce was bad enough. Are these called shoujos? Yeah. What is like the most famous... Am I really gonna... I should just watch a female anime and just... No, you know what? I shouldn't.
Kida Ryoko.
Sailor Moon.
So you see here that early on in anime, Europe represented a foreign setting where
has to be
characters
a common
could behave
one, right?
differently to what the norms in Japan allow, while still speaking very much directly
sending
to Japanese
razor
audiences.
blades?
This is a theme that would continue on in the 70s as we approach the era of Miyazaki.
You better not spoil this anime. This looks adorable.
Anime subgenre began to emerge. Series which directly retold traditional European stories. Heidi, the show I mentioned at the start of this video, was one of the pioneering works in this field, and was part of a larger series called the World Masterpiece Theater. This was a Japanese TV show which would take a classic piece of literature and spend a year airing it as a serialized anime. The series adapted everything from The Moomin of Finland to the British classic of Peter Pan, and although it was not originally part of the series, Heidi was later usurped as part of the wider umbrella of the World Masterpiece Theater.
Oh, look at
in
that.
almost all these series, Europe is shown as a magical, idyllic land where adventures can take place, and children in particular are at liberty to discover themselves and the world around them. And if you're wondering why this was the case, critic Cobus van Staden summarizes it well. There are very few anime depictions of contemporary Europe. Mostly, Europe is treated as a changeless Ruritania, where the use of historically European detailing and landscapes designates the setting as beautifully past. What Van Staden is saying here is that for anime, Europe becomes an almost fantastical, fictional land, trapped in that era when cutesy little villages were tucked away in some lush green part of the world, away from the corruption of the modern industrial age and the evils that come with it. It's also followed in the footsteps of classic European literature and the trend of Bildungsroman, which means coming-of-age stories, in the vein of what Charles Dickens wrote, where children confront a cold adult world and learn lessons meant to teach the viewing or reading audiences valuable life lessons. On top of that, the European setting allowed filmmakers to tell a different kind of story, unlike the kinds currently being told to Japanese audiences at the time in more action-oriented anime. Speaking on his time working on Heidi, Hayao Miyazaki wrote that we wanted to create a work for children that wasn't frivolous, and we wanted to break away from the compromised and slapdash television animation shows of that time. In fact, this desire was so strong that it actually ended up taking the animation company that made Heidi, Zuio Aizo, and ended up running it into the ground financially. Heidi's animators were so determined to make sure that there was lasting quality in every cell and every second of animation.
That's why it's so
they spent
beautifully
way
animated.
more time making each episode than was the norm for the industry. Miyazaki refers to making
at
Heidi
that.
in a year-long state of emergency and said that it was the lessons that he learned from making the show that pushed him away from television and towards films. It was only then that we came to understand the danger of television, he writes. Television repeatedly
Interesting.
demands the same thing. Its voraciousness makes everything banal. We realized that television required our state of emergency to become a normal condition. The only way to have a long-term relationship with television is to lower the level of production quality to one that can be sustained. Though this was obviously tragic at the time, it's also something we can perhaps be grateful for now, because it's ultimately what leads to the creation of Studio Ghibli in 1985, founded by the legendary figures of Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata, who had worked together on the show Heidi. As should already be apparent by now, Miyazaki in particular had a great personal fascination with Europe and made several research trips across various parts of the continent, from Wales to Stockholm to several places in Germany.
Such a good
It is these
film.
varied influences that would eventually become
Apparently
the
it's a real
iconic
place?
Studio Ghibli style.
Well,
which
no,
most of us
okay.
can now
Not the parts where they turn into pigs and apparently there's a place that all of this is based off of. I want to say it's in Taiwan.
recognize at just a glance and has influenced so many anime since. But unlike Heidi, where Switzerland was a relatively specific but rural utopia, in Ghibli films we start to see a change in emphasis. Miyazaki uses all these places that he had visited and taken pictures of and turns them into one beautiful amalgamation. For
What is your
example,
favorite
if we
Ghibli
look
film?
at Kiki's Delivery Service,
Let me know.
which is one of my favorite films of all time,
Mine's Spirited
we
Away.
can see that the locations and architecture aren't particularly matched with
Only one
any
I've watched.
one European location. Instead, it's a mix of various European aesthetics, but also some fantastical and anachronistic elements, making it hard to place exactly where or what time period the film is supposed to be set in. The same can be said of Howl's Moving Castle, which on top of having magic, of course, also has things like gliders and various steam machinations,
Wow.
which have gone on to massively influence steampunk and basically create another subgenre where a vague hodgepodge Europe is often the setting. Critic Danny Cavallaro writes that this all comes from the Japanese concept of akogare no Paris, the Paris of our dreams, which refers to an elaborately fantasized Europe as
I think
seen
Howl's
through the
Moving
Eastern
Castle is going to
eyes.
be my next
This is
one.
actually quite funny because this
Unless he
idealization
spoils
of
it.
Europe, pushed heavily by Miyazaki amongst others, has actually resulted in a specific phenomenon called Paris Syndrome, which is a term coined by a
Look at
Japanese
that.
psychiatrist to refer to the cultural shock that tourists, particularly Japanese and
I
other
really
Asian
am, like,
tourists,
noticing
feel
how
when they turn up to
Frieren
Paris
was-
and realize that it's not at all as magical as they imagined it to be. And apparently, it can cause quite severe mental health problems. But going back
Inspired
to Ghibli
by
films,
all of
we can see
the
again
art
the
style
use
and
of
stuff
Europe as a
by
fantastical,
Ghibli.
exotic setting, which allows for new stories to be told. But there's also something new being done.
We
which is
we
that
will
the
eventually
idyllic
check
European
out other
setting
films.
is often corrupted by the advancement of technology. Films like Howl's Moving Castle and the early Ghibli work Castle in the Sky are
That
explicit
looks
warnings on the
insane.
dangers of technology, and particularly militaristic technology. While both films start off with wholesome and idyllic settings, these are quickly destroyed and the peace ruined by people who use the fruits of human advancement for their own selfish gain. Both our main characters, Sophie and Pazu, respectively, have their lives turned upside down by
Okay, he's not going to
Japan
spoil it.
from East Asia. Rather than necessarily set these films in Japan and make the message more blunt, but also more antagonizing, one possible reason for setting anime in Europe is that it allows the social critique to be more generalized and also one that is more universal. And with so much of this militaristic behavior originating from the European powers, it made added sense to tell these stories in a European setting as well. This again is a major theme that continues in the steampunk genre, where the dangers of technology are often central to the story. And even outside steampunk, the European setting can still offer a great window into those same critiques. Full Metal Alchemist, which is often listed as one of the best
Overrated.
anime of all time, touches on these very themes. It follows the story of two brothers, Alphonse and Edward Elric, obviously Germanic names, in the fictional country of Amestris, which is clearly meant to portray a militaristic
I hope he
Germany.
spoils
In their
this for
world,
everyone.
Alchemy is a science which allows alchemists to transform objects from one form to another, as long as they follow the law of equivalent exchange, which is that they must provide something of equal value to transmute an object like they do. The older brother, Edward, is recruited by the government to become a state alchemist, which he hopes will allow him to conduct research on returning him and his brother to their original bodies, which themselves were lost during the reckless pursuit of scientific advancement. But the government merely uses its alchemists as human weapons for militaristic expansion, and the brothers soon learn the dark world they've been dragged into. Disturbed by what they see, they began working on ending the current regime and to fix the wrongs they see in the world. As we get closer and closer to the modern day of anime, the reasons for the European settings become increasingly diverse, as we see in examples like this. But the influences of their origins are still also very clear. Nowadays, we live in an era where the world is much more globalized and easy to access. The absolute domination of the internet over our lives and the ability to travel across the world so much more freely has done a lot to demystify Europe to Japan and vice versa. So accordingly, representations of Europe have started to become even more common, though they still follow a lot of the same inspirations we've spoken about already. Let me break down some of the different kinds. We've seen the rise of anime like the Vinland Saga, which is a beautiful exploration of violence, slavery, and the evils of war. The anime is set mostly in England and Denmark, but it's also an historical account.
Even if you've never watched anime, I recommend Vinland Saga. Vikings. If you like Vikings and stuff, just go watch it. Elite. Unbelievable show.
Of the real events of the Danish conquering of England. It features real characters like King Canute and Thorfinn, but takes creative liberties with the specifics of their stories. The show plays with all the various traditions we've just spoken about in this video. Much like Miyazaki's works, the European setting in the Vinland Saga allows for scathing critiques of armed conflict and dehumanization, but it also deviates in that it is very much concerned with the realism of where it is set.
Yeah, but you kind of have to
fantastical, magical land.
Put yourself in the other person's shoes who's never seen anime. If you mention Vikings, it'll like lift them up and maybe watch it.
There are real world events that the story has to incorporate and stay true to, so it doesn't play loose with those aspects. In this regard, it's much more like the Rose of Versailles. It's inspired in equal parts by real Norse folklore, but also just the author Makoto Yukimura's personal fascination with the culture. So overall, we can say a show like the Vinland Saga represents the Japanese desire to tell stories inspired by the local tales of European cultures. More traditionally, we have anime like Attack on Titan, which although clearly not as wholesome as Ghibli films, is essentially following in the same tradition. It follows the same beats of the European setting being a mishmash
of
Finland
this year or next year?
With Germanic names like Eren Jaeger and the clear Nazi parallels, all the way to the Norse influences for the Titans. But a different reason for the European setting in modern anime is actually just the exoticism of Europe. In the popular anime One Piece, for example, we have an entire arc set in the fictional setting of Dressrosa, which is an island inspired by Spain.
No one cares, we just care about the cake island.
The main villain of the arc, Don Flamingo, should tell you everything you need to know just by his name, which is inspired by the Spanish epic novel Don Quixote. There's even
Don Flamingo, isn't that a Final Fantasy villain?
Depictions of paella and flamenco dancing. But here, we still see
you
the
know
general
what?
mixing of
We're starting One Piece tomorrow.
European aesthetics, with an important part of the Dressrosa arc taking place in a Colosseum, which is of course Italian in origin. So sometimes it's no deeper than just Europe being a fun and exotic place to set an anime in. Finally, we have something which is actually relatively new in terms of reasons.
You've got to give it to One Piece. The characters look so
A vast number of anime are set in a European medieval world of adventures and quests. Whether that be digital, like in Sword Art Online, or real, like they are in Frieren Beyond Journey's End. This one is fairly simple to explain, so I'll keep it short, in that the reason so many video games take place in this kind of setting is that they're all drawing inspiration from Dungeons and Dragons, which is the foundational point of role-playing games, particularly video games. If you want to see that topic covered, the
inspiration is technically from Lord of the Rings. It wasn't Dungeons and Dragons, literally. Didn't it just copy everything what's his name did? I'm just going to go with that. That I might have just spreaded massive misinformation, but Lord of the Rings is the GOAT, so we'll just go with that.
I have another video I made about it here, and you'll find a link in the video description. But it's not news that video games are very popular in Japan, and so it's only natural that with the action-adventure RPG genre being so heavily set in this kind of period and aesthetic, that many modern anime would also want to explore that kind of world. This is especially true in the isekai subgenre, which is a genre characterized by the fact that the main character is suddenly transported from the boring real world to a new, often literally magical world of knights and dragons, like in the show Jobless Reincarnation, which features a protagonist who lives in modern-day Japan as an incel-type loser and is deeply unsatisfied with his life. But one day when he ends up in an accident and thinks he's died, he actually ends up waking up in a magical European world full of adventures and monsters. And here, he's given a second chance at life. And as we've established, what better setting for a second chance in a magical place than the Europe that anime loves?
Does he keep his mind, or is he like the mind of the person he is? Like, does he know in the anime that he's still himself? So like, can he like just create Google and just become a billionaire? He keeps his mind. All right, this is what you do. You just sing songs like, I don't know, I've Got a Feeling from Black Eyed Peas. You make millions off that. What else do you do? I'm just copying Hot Tub Time Machine, I'll be honest. If anyone's seen Hot Tub Time Machine, just do that.
What better setting for a second chance in a magical place than the Europe that anime loves?
Okay, maybe not create Google.
So this has been a long video, and an even longer personal journey for me to investigate something that's been on my mind for a long time.
Good
Namely,
video.
why so many anime are set in Europe. Ultimately, the relationship is complex and has a long history and origin, which hopefully I've done my best to elaborate on, but obviously has far more steps along the way than I have the time to get into, or even the resources to investigate. On top of that, something I haven't mentioned yet is the commercialization of anime. Ever since anime started becoming TV products and potentially sold to European markets, its relationship with Europe became obviously more involved. It makes sense that if you're making an anime and you want it to have a more global appeal, that you might set it in Europe or borrow from European aesthetics to make the show more watchable to Western audiences. But
you know what we need? More animes in other continents. Middle East, Africa, an Australian anime, anime in Antarctica. Come on. Someone.
how much we should read into that is a matter of heated debate.
I would
between
do it, but I'm
academics.
busy.
Speaking of, I want to specifically shout out the academic article by Oscar Garcia Aranda and the mammoth book by Jonathan Clements called Anime History, both of which were amazing resources for research for this video, and I'll be providing all my references in the video description. In my mind, there's a fairly clear line running through the development of anime's relationship with Europe, starting with the general cultural fascination amongst Japanese people, to then the use of Europe as a place for speaking on taboo topics in shoujo anime. From there it evolves to the exploration of European folk tales and children's stories, to the Ghibli model of a fantastical magical Europe, which also leads to the industrialized steampunk themes that offer a chance to make social critiques. Finally, we have the modern era where all
This
these influences
steampunk
offer
one, is this Howl's Moving Castle? This looks insane.
chance to make social critiques. Finally, we have the
What a shot.
modern era where all these influences kind of mix, and we also get the addition of video games, which bring with them their own fascination with medieval Europe in particular, courtesy of Dungeons and Dragons and other
Bro,
role-playing
what game
games.
are you
So there
showing?
have
Some
it. I hope you've
mobile
enjoyed this
shit.
video because it has truly been a labor of love. And if you have, then please like and subscribe and
Oh.
share this video so that it can reach a wider audience. Also,
That
if you'd
can't
like
be
to
good.
support
Good video. Very good. Like that. That wasn't brain rot, it's brain got. We need more videos like this. You know, you're learning, it's fun to watch, fun to check out. Definitely go and check out the channel The Soak. That is really cool. We might have to react to more videos from him. Heidi wasn't even considered to be anime in Germany and Switzerland back then. It was just seen as a cartoon for children. That's why when I first started reacting to anime, I brought up Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon, as to me they weren't animes. I know they are, but they just were, like, I grew up they were cartoons. Do you know what I mean? So I didn't like class them to myself as animes. Obviously they are, but it's because those are the few that like reached my, I guess, upbringing that I came across. Oh, Digimon as well. Beyblade. That was pretty much it. Growing up in Libya, there were a few. There's one called Adnan Walina, but that's the Arabic name, and one called Captain Majid, which I grew up and found out it's Captain Subasa. I can't remember what Adnan Walina is in the English mode, if anyone here knows. Oh, and the detective with the big glasses. So those were all cartoons to me. And there was some badass yo-yo anime as well. So like the first anime that I ever just watched, personally, was Attack on Titan, and that was on this channel. Like, I sat down and, okay, this is an anime. You know what I mean? Naruto is the first anime I watched knowing it's an anime, yeah. Because someone mentioned they grew up in an area, I think it was Brukov. Yeah, anime wasn't a thing in the Netherlands when I was younger. I feel like Pokemon was the first one. Exactly. Exactly the same. I'm not saying it wasn't a thing for other people growing up in England, but personally, it just didn't enter my circle. Friends, nothing like that. I'd heard whispers of Dragon Ball, never, you know, watched it or anything. I was more interested personally growing up in Ed, Ed and Eddie, Fairly Odd Parents when I was a kid. What else? What other cartoons? Just, you know, Disney films and just stuff like that. Lion King, Hercules. So yeah, everything like that looked like this was a cartoon. Wasn't. You know what I mean? It wasn't an anime. The Adventures of Jackie Chan, that's a good one. Don't forget the Mr. Bean one. Really cool. Really cool video. This does make me realize, though, that we need more shows in other parts of the world, based off other parts of the world. I can't believe there hasn't been like a... Now, if there is, then I'd love to check it out. I can't believe there isn't an anime based in like a tribe in Africa where it's like a kid and you follow the kid growing up. Obviously, it'll be a massively, you know, romanticized version of it, but that would be so cool. Like, do you know what I mean? Spear hunting lions and stuff. Just, I don't know. That just sounds amazing. Hopefully, you know, down the line, or I don't know, we get more animes from different parts of the world as well. Really cool video. Here we go. Look at this. Violet Evergarden, which is very high up on my list. Has some of the most beautiful depictions of European-inspired culture I've ever seen. Might be a sign to finally watch Violet Evergarden, ladies and gents. It might be a sign. Either way, thank you so much for watching. Follow my Twitch, twitch.tv/OmarioRpg, where we react to stuff every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And I'll see you guys next time.